you got to be willing for somebody to look at you side-eyed, right? Like, you got to be willing to not be the favorite person in the room, to not be liked by everyone. Let me put it this way. If you're not willing to be openly called out as the worst thing in the world,
The worst name,
bigot, racist, sexist, transphobe, whatever. If you're not willing to face those accusations in public from people who you know and deal with on a day-to-day basis, then you are not ready to take this country back. Because
Right.
that's what it's going to take.
The Hudson-Mekeland Podcast.
So we're out here at the first night of Albertville Friendly City Days, our city festival that we have here in the town that I represented as a city council member for 7 years off and on, and now serve as state representative, and it's a beautiful night.
It is. Actually, the rain broke up. It was raining a little bit ago.
A little bit. Been getting quite a bit of that this year, which is a good thing, you know.
Well, I had a constituent call me today because he was trying to get some of that drought relief money, and it's kind of been held up at the state somehow.
Yeah.
And now, just the other day, our rain gauge had 4 inches in it, and another 1 7/8 inches this morning.
Yeah.
So we went from not enough to a little too much, which the farmers like. I get it.
Yeah.
But
It's good.
yeah.
I spent the first half of my day today on a bus tour with the Wright County Soil and Water Conservation District, which is only half as boring as it sounds.
Actually, I enjoy those. So in my first 2 terms, Benton County Soil and Water Conservation District, you know, I went into it thinking it was going to be a whole lot of it was something else, and I learned a lot, and I actually learned to enjoy them. So now I have a Sherburne County one coming up, and I look forward to them. There's a lot to be learned there.
I learned quite a bit, actually. Part of the reason why I wanted to do it was because I like to challenge myself to take advantage of opportunities to learn about the areas of public policy that I know the absolute least about.
Right.
And soil and water conservation is definitely right there, and it's tangential to agriculture, of course. 3 out of the 4 projects we stopped and looked at today had to do with the intersection between farmer properties and lake associations, and the tension that can naturally exist there between the two.
Nitrogen.
Yep, and the ways in which they creatively come up with very impressive structures, topographical structures, in order to route water in a particular way to minimize sediment and to minimize
Nitrogen flowing into the waterways.
Absolutely. And then the last place we stopped today, we stopped at a farmer's operation, small farm, where he is using something called, and I'm totally going to mess it up what it is, but it's something like, I can't remember, but it's a particular type of tilling, where you just, instead of tilling the whole of the soil, you till like these tiny little strips.
Yep.
And then the next year you move it over a couple inches, and the next year you move it over a couple inches. So you actually keep the soil intact, and that helps with erosion, and it helps with the quality of the soil over time. Yields improve over time, apparently, and it fosters what he called his most important livestock, which is earthworms. The earthworms have a better habitat and quality of life, and of course that benefits in terms of the way the nutrients get turned over in the soil. And I'm just copying and pasting what I heard. I have no idea what I'm talking about.
So interestingly enough, earthworms, I believe they were imported from elsewhere in the country back in the day. I remember reading something about that. But they aerate the soil.
Yeah.
Because they obviously tunnel through it. And so yes, there's part of that. And then now a big thing is cover crops.
Yep. We talked about that.
That's a big part of it. There's a lot of, especially on livestock farms, of sewage retention.
Yep.
And ponds, which a lot of that's funded by the state.
Yep.
And some of it's pretty impressive. Unfortunately, it comes with big hooks. If you take the money from state and federal grant programs, then you are forced to comply with whatever their rules are at the time, and any rule changes they make during that duration of that time frame, which I've been through that in the last 6 years with different landowners.
Okay.
It's kind of an interesting thing. You'd think like, hey, this is the deal I signed. I took this amount of money, you know, and then whether it's 50% or whatever. And there was one farmer near me. It was over $1 million project, and he ponied up $600,000, I believe. But then he has to be compliant with whatever rules were in play at the time and whatever they do over the next 5-year period.
Yeah, whatever they come up with. Yep,
right.
Exactly.
So that was an interesting thing to understand.
Yeah, I mean, and I tease about it being, you know, half as boring as it sounds, but the fact of the matter is that all this stuff is deeply fascinating. I mean, listening to the farmer that we talked to the last stop, you wouldn't know what to look at the guy, but he's running an industry, right? Like, he's running computer-operated tractors that drive themselves and are, like, GPS located down to, like, the centimeter and know exactly where they're going and exactly how much fertilizer they're dispensing and exactly where the seeds are going to go. And, you know, it ain't your great-grandfather's farming operation. I mean, this is some high-tech stuff.
So in that, it's really interesting because I don't know how much irrigation you have down here on agricultural land. We have a heavy amount of it because we're sandy soil. And they have this dialed in now where as that pivot moves in a 360-degree motion, it'll stop dropping in some areas. If it's low-level land, it will just shut off. And then in the higher areas, it'll pour it on harder. And they have drop-down little arms that come down so it doesn't evaporate as fast.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty fascinating, the technology. And they can program all this.
Yeah.
And then they can get all this on their smartphones. Like, if it's raining out, they can, like, stop it or get alarms, whatever. I mean, it's a pretty amazing thing, all the technology they're moving in. Now, there's a college out it's southwest of you and I, and that they teach all of the farming business, farming management. It's a pretty fascinating thing. It's not just out playing with dirt anymore.
No. It is very precision, and if you make mistakes, you're going to pay for it. So I got to tell you, I mean, certainly some segment of our audience is probably wondering, really, you have nothing better to talk about right now than soil and water conservation and agriculture? Fact of the matter is, I just, in order to decompress, I kind of wanted to start out there. But man, lots of stuff going on. We have a convicted felon running for the nomination for President of the United States. I guess we need to pack up and go home. Democrats win. We got a convicted felon. We just need to toss it up and walk away.
Well, we have a charged felon sitting in the Senate that refuses to resign. I mean,
True.
it's charged.
Same day we found out that.
Yes, right? but a charged felon, first-degree felony burglary.
Well,
by the
I
way.
should say same day we found out that the DFL finally called on her to resign.
Correct.
Yeah. So.
But and the ag policy, while it sounds kind of mundane to many people, it does tie into a lot of things. Because there's a lot of other aspects of all this. If you don't have food, you don't have life.
It's kind of a big deal.
And so I literally spent also today on the phone with somebody. You know, we get these emails.
Yep.
And this is a coalition or group that is advocating to lift the moratorium or at least do a study to bring back nuclear in Minnesota, nuclear power, to add more of that. And it was very interesting as I represent a district just not too far from here, and they currently are putting 6,000 acres worth of solar panels in, and while they're shutting down a 2,400 megawatt coal plant.
Yes.
So, which is one of the largest ones in the upper Midwest, like upper Midwest, not just in the state, upper Midwest. And they've already shut one of 3 down, and the next one goes down 2026, and then the last one goes down 2030. So, and on top of that, they've added, they've just sold land to data centers, of which one will consume more power than the very near nuclear plant plus the coal plant. Constantly. Makes one wonder. So there is got to be some kind of backup plan here. Like you don't shut it off and then figure out what you're going to build later, because otherwise people, I mean, our climate can get pretty hot in the summer. Not as much of it, luckily, but it can also get very, very cold. 2019, 2021, we had 2 of the coldest winters as of late. Easily broke mid-30 below zero, actual temp, not wind chill. So, but you look at all this, how are the humans going to survive if we keep going down this path?
Yeah, it's interesting. I forget exactly who it was, but it was one of these WEF types who I recently retweeted, who was saying exactly that. He's saying, look, we got all these data centers that are going up. They can't run on intermittent power. Like, it needs to be a constant source, a reliable source all the time. And so you say, like, what's the plan? I don't know that there is one, but the closest thing that they could have to one is relying upon power that comes from out of state, which is, this is kind of the routine, right? Of let's score how virtuously green we are based upon how much we slit our own throats in the energy sector. But then let's quietly depend upon everybody else around us to feed us the energy necessary in order to maintain our quality of life. It's a deeply irresponsible way to go about living.
So that was actually presented in an energy committee that is basically what they're going to do.
Yeah.
They're going to build baseload energy in the surrounding states.
Right.
So then we're going to have these 300, 400, 500 mile high voltage transmission lines running it back into the interconnects here. Mm-hmm. Then we look at what happened a month ago down in Oklahoma and the big tornado that happened down there, and then there was another one in a nearby state, and then they even hit Iowa as well. So what happens if you have a 500 mile large transmission line? These are big towers. These aren't little power poles like you might be able to see here.
Yeah.
These are big towers. And it takes one of those towers out and topples all those lines. This is not just one community because, a small little power pole went down and knocked out, 100 houses. This would be like a majority of a state. And you don't put one of those several 100-foot big structures back up in 2 days. And that's kind of part of the uniqueness of where all of this is going.
Yeah, and that's kind of the theme. I mean, going into 2024, there's so much stuff that we have to talk about that it almost boggles the mind in terms of what the Democrat trifecta has set up Minnesota for. But I think the best summary of it is just like unsustainability. Like, this is not a sustainable plan. I mean, pick your policy jurisdiction, right? Whether you're talking about energy or you're talking about childcare or you're talking about jobs, the economy, labor, workforce, taxes. Pick your poison. None of it is sustainable. One of the analogies that I use, because, we've talked often about the $18 billion budget surplus that they spent every thin dime of. They raised the budget by 40%. They raised taxes by $10 billion. The analogy that I came up with for this is, and it's not particularly brilliant, I think it's pretty obvious, is let's say you're making $50,000 a year household income, which is, pretty moderate, but we're just using that for the sake of argument. $50,000 household income, and you've been budgeting it in such a way that you spend every thin dime every year. Like, you have nothing left over at the end of the year, and you've been doing that year over year for God knows how far back. You got no savings, nothing. All of a sudden, you finally win that scratch off, you finally hit the Powerball, you got yourself a cool $1 million after taxes and fees and everything, $1 million cash to spend. And so how do you choose to handle that? Well, you go out and you spend that entire $1 million on bling and blitz, right? And on top of that, you increase your spending habits to be at pace with earning $70,000 a year, even though your actual income has remained at $50,000. That is effectively what they've done.
Which, isn't that ironic how you put that together, because we hear that often about those that come into a windfall of money, that of lottery. Mm-hmm. They end up worse off than they were before.
Right. That's exactly
what happened.
Yes.
I mean, it's literally exactly what happened.
And we laugh because, we're men and the alternative is to cry. But I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? How I can understand a person doing that. I can understand a couple doing that. Your state government?
Which is
like the collective minds
104 voices, I believe, that have, 105, we got to include the governor in there, plus all the bureaucrats, but 105 elected people made that decision.
Yep. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, why? Like, how and why? And I think the answer really comes down to there just aren't any checks and balances in this state. It's not just that the Democrats have the trifecta right now. It's that they have held executive authority for decades, for almost half a century. And in that time, they've had the opportunity to place their people, because they've also held all the constitutional offices, Attorney General, Secretary of State, Auditor. They've had this opportunity to plant their people of like mind and certainly of political loyalty into all of these agencies and departments and bureaucratic what have you. And so anything there, any mechanism for restraint, any mechanism for pushback has been completely eliminated. It's just a bunch of yes men saying yes, 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 yes to the craziest idea that anybody comes up with. And because they had such narrow majorities this year, these past 2 years, with a 1-member majority in the Senate and 4 in the House, that has defaulted to them having to rely upon their most insane ideas from their most irresponsible people. And that's what's defined the day in Minnesota. That's how you can get a state government that is run like a household, from the hood or the trailer park that just hit the jackpot and then blew it all on bling.
Well, and actually, it hasn't been decades since there was a Republican governor, because that was like 2007, 8. Plunny was governor.
Sure.
But so there has been back and forth, and then we had Jesse Ventura, independent, had some unique ideas, but he got some people placed in a lot of these bureaucracies that, they weren't completely nuts one way or the other. And so did Plunny and Arnie Carlson back in the day. But all of those people have now retired within the bureaucracies.
Right.
And that's what I heard a lot of last year and this year is why this biennium has gone so far different than the last time the Democrats had the trifecta, because there was still so many bureaucrats within the Department of Labor or Department of Revenue or what have you that were appointed by other people, but now they're all retired and moved on. And even Department of Transportation. I mean, they literally passed a bill saying you need a license now to take scrap metal in, because they funded EV charging stations, and now in the metro they're stealing the cables off of them and they're taking them in for scrap. So now if you're grandma and grandpa and you got, 4 bags of aluminum cans that are worth $24, you got to go buy a $250 license to take in. So it's going to go in the garbage. So
guess that's just go in the landfill then.
We're not going to recycle. I thought recycling was good.
Right.
But apparently that's not the plan.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not.
For some, maybe. Some. And we're sitting out here at a carnival, and as we talk about all this, the interesting thing is, look at all these young people out here playing and riding rides, and they're just having fun.
Yeah.
And we're talking about all this because, we kind of live, sleep, eat, breathe all this to make sure they can have fun.
That's right.
Because the day it doesn't look good.
No.
I mean, they're trying to ban propane, natural gas,
right,
all of that. So I don't know how you would cook all the fair food.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so many things that are being thrown out there, and it's all about all these kids.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's turn our sights to the national stage. So again, bringing up the fact that Donald Trump is now a convicted felon as a result of these ridiculous felony charges that were totally concocted in New York. I don't know. My initial reaction to this was that it's not going to go well for the Democrats. That anecdotally, he raised, what was it, $34 million in 24 hours, and then I think, or no, that might have been 12.
It was,
and then it was like 52.
It was 54, 55 between two different venues, but basically crashed.
Crashed, went red within minutes.
Yeah.
And I real time I saw that happen. And then on top of that, you had like 30% of the donations over that period of time coming from small donor, first-time donors.
Never before donors, and not necessarily small, some big.
Yeah.
And actually some big vocal people, not typically political, but have come out with some pretty big numbers.
Yeah. And so all of that would suggest that the Democrats really stepped in it and that this is not going to go well for them. But then, of course, come, the polling and the focus groups all trying to spin the narrative that, this is bad for Trump. He's losing people. He's losing independence. And it's just one of those things where it's a don't believe your lying eyes type situation. I mean, I'm not talking to a lot of people. In fact, I haven't talked to anybody, even amongst the folks who are typically anti-Trump in my personal sphere, who are looking at this and saying, oh yeah, I'm definitely not voting for Trump right now. In fact, what I saw organically in the 24 hours after the verdict was Jake Duesenberg organically saying the exact same thing as David Hann. Okay, so like uniformity across the spectrum of Republican and conservative within the state of Minnesota and nationally, saying, all right, you guys done screwed up. We're behind Donald Trump. We're all in now. And only a Democrat could do that. Republicans can't unite us, but Democrats sure can.
Well, and I don't know if you saw, I think it was yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, there's an article on Biden. And on their articles, they always say like it's a 2-minute read or a 5-minute read. And they're typically in that 3 to 5 minute is a normal article. Look what they wrote about Biden yesterday. It's a 20-minute article. It's that extensive. And it's not very flattering towards Joe Biden. And this is all of what's coming out. Because they know that, so that $54 million that we're talking about, since then it's been said it's over $200 million now, as the days have pressed on. And we're going to see this continue to grow. The popularity doesn't seem to be waning. The polls don't show that Trump is going down, Biden's going up. Some of Biden's recent appearances did not look like they went real well. Even the more mainstream media is pointing it out now, because even Time put out an article as well that's not so flattering towards Biden. So they're acknowledging this is not going in the right direction.
You got Bill Maher flat out saying Biden's going to lose.
Well, and I'm not trying to call any specific. I mean, I'll take the media outlets, which I guess he is, but at the end of the day, they can keep doing what they're doing, and the more they do it, the more it goes backwards against them, and the people just simply want normalcy back.
Yes.
And there's more and more people that I know personally that lean left. We don't agree on a lot of things, politically speaking, but they certainly want to go back to what they had for what the cost of things were just in early 2020 and 2019. And what's happening now, between the southern border, crime, and we can get into that in a minute because there's a whole big thing there with the Hennepin County attorney. But and yet they keep double downing on all this stuff, and they don't back off. Right now, the most important thing is it's not your public safety. No. We're going to let the criminals out, and we're going to blame the victim. We're going to prosecute the cops so we don't have any more of them, law enforcement officers, because that apparently is abundance of that, which nobody's going into anymore. We hear that all the time. And yet the people are screaming that we need some help. And they don't even respond to so many calls in the inner city anymore. They're off the chart. Hey, yeah, we'll get to it when we can. So, and we see a lot of all these articles that are out there of either people being violently assaulted, murdered, raped, what have you, and it seems to be people that were detained. They crossed the border illegally, and they got kicked loose multiple times, and then it comes to this. And even the young officer, I think he was 36 years old, I believe it's Officer Mitchell, the person that shot him should have been in jail.
Of course. That's the way it always goes.
He was let out, is it parole or whatever, a bond, let out on a bond, and almost 2 years ago, and he should have never been based on what he had committed then. And now you have a dead officer laying in the street, and then several other people got wounded. But where's the outrage on that one? That's what really kind of boggles me is, all the stuff we saw with the state trooper recently, and then they're not done with that one either. You see that now that the family is calling for more.
You're talking about Trooper Ryan Lundregan, who was being persecuted or prosecuted for the
persecuted.
Both.
Right.
For the killing, the shooting death of Ricky Cobb II, and Mary Moriarty finally relented and chose to drop the charges. The rumor is that Governor Tim Walz was going to take the case away from her finally. She brought in high-powered D.C. attorneys from across the continent to come in who took her money and then told her what she didn't want to hear.
Right.
Because that's what lawyers do. And this is after she went to the other side of the continent to find multiple use of force experts who also didn't tell her what she wanted to hear.
And then she tried to suppress that report.
Yeah.
From a use of force
expert. And so, she basically came to the end of her rope. And now, because she has strung along, and I got into this a little bit on Twitter today with some folks, who, we're supposed to feel sorry for the Cobb family. Well, I do feel sorry for the Cobb family, but not for the reasons that I'm supposed to.
Right.
I feel sorry for them because they've been abused and victimized. They are the victims of politics. They've been sold a lie that they're the victims here, and maybe they are the victims, but they're not the victims of Trooper Ryan Lundregan. They're the victims of Ricky Cobb II, primarily, and Mary Moriarty secondarily, because she's the one who sold them on the lie that Ricky Cobb is a victim and that they were due some kind of justice, when in point of fact, when you drag cops behind you in a car, you reasonably ought to expect that you're probably going to die, right? And so the fact that Moriarty sold them on the lie that they were the victims here and that Cobb was the victim here, as opposed to the officers who were responding in their own self-defense in order to stop a bad actor who was acting in criminal fashion and was wanted on criminal warrants, that's Mary Moriarty's fault, right? And she really ought to be held accountable for that. It's absolutely insane that we've gotten to that point.
Well, but it's not only her fault, because you back up 3-4 years or 2 years prior to that. So what were we in 2024? So 3-4 years. Governor Walz was doing the same thing.
Yep.
And Barack Obama did the same thing.
Yep.
He demonized law enforcement, and none of this should ever happen. We've seen it time and time again where they resist.
Yep.
And things go sideways, and they end up getting either severely injured or dead. And then it's not their fault, it's the officer's fault.
Right.
I mean, we saw it in, was it Ferguson, Missouri?
Yeah. Yep.
Which took a long time.
That was kind of the first big high-profile.
Yes, that was the precipice of it. And it was actually, I think, one either right before or right after, where he was selling, what do they call it, cigarettes in New York.
Yeah.
But a very similar thing. And so, okay, selling cigarettes. Maybe we shouldn't have a law against it.
I'm fine with that.
I mean, because then it wouldn't even be law enforcement's big deal to worry about it. And even if you look at it since then, so that whoever the family is of that, and I don't remember that young man's name. It's close into my memory, but they have since legalized marijuana damn near everywhere. So because he was peddling cigarettes and evading tax revenue, it was what the state was really upset about, right? That's the law they passed. And since then, now they've legalized marijuana, so his offense then means nothing now. It wouldn't even be, the cops wouldn't even look at it. Well, for one, there aren't any, or very few left.
Yeah.
So he lost his life on account of peddling cigarettes to try to make a buck. And yet, so since then, they've changed the laws that would mean what he did then would no longer be an offense. So where's their anger towards the policy?
Well, I mean, obviously that's not what it's about, right? Like this is not about a good faith analysis of what the right and wrong policies ought to be. This is entirely about politics. I mean, you saw Mary Moriarty the day after she dropped the charges. She dropped them on Sunday. Monday, she gets on this press conference and goes on this insane rant, blaming everything and everyone except for herself for the outcome of the case, accusing Tim Walz of tilting against her because she's a queer woman, which I'll be honest with you, I probably should have recognized it. I didn't know she was a queer woman. I
didn't know you didn't know.
Well, I mean, I don't think of those terms, right? It's just like that's not important to me, right? What's important to me is she's insane. That's what's important to me, and she's cloaked in civic authority and she's abusing it in order to go after the cops. That's what's important to me. But the fact that she has to go there and accuse Tim Walz of being homophobic, because that's obviously what's motivating his scenario here.
Yeah, I mean, anti-queer or homophobic, and there was a few others in there too. Anti-female, whatever the word is.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because she's a woman as well. It's like, wow, you are really stretching credulity even on your own side. Like, they won't say it, but I have to imagine even Democrats are looking at that and doing a face plant and thinking to themselves, wow.
Well, Congressman Angie Craig came out and put out a public statement saying this was not a fair statement, who was also
and that I do know only because she said it 1,000 times before. Right.
But even Congressman Dean Phillips made a statement, and I think CBS locally affiliate put out a report that she is going to stick to her convictions. This is the Hudson County Attorney Mary, based on what she campaigned on, because she's going to have justice reform, which means criminals don't go to jail.
No.
And victims sucks being you.
Sucks being you. And
It's only a car.
Listen, here's the other thing. So Paul Novotny, who's the lead on the House Public Safety Committee that I sit on, the two of us went to this thing this past Saturday, the day before Mary Moriarty dropped these charges in Minneapolis at 36th and Penn. We met up with these street activists who were just hanging out in the corner wearing these orange shirts saying Operation Hug the Block, sitting there calling for peace. We sat and chat with them for about an hour. We saw a kid across the street who was picking up trash as he was waiting for his bus. We saw a bunch of guys on the other side of the street and the other side of the corner tending a garden, trying to beautify the place. We had people stopping by, joking around, talking to us, having a good time. And, I had a real good feeling about the whole experience. An hour after we left there, not a block away, somebody was shot and killed in broad daylight.
Correct.
Okay? Say his name. How come we never hear about the names of the people who are killed by other black people? The black men killed by other black men. Why isn't that require some kind of justice? Who's to blame for that? Is that systemic racism? Is that white supremacy? Does that indicate any sort of need for justice reform? Or are we just going to accept that as the cost of doing business? And they have no answer for it. None whatsoever, other than this kind of vague insinuation that if you just make it rain tax dollars on the community, that's somehow going to negate the nature of man to do harm to man. And it's like, no, that's not how any of that works.
So how's it going to play out now that we have all these illegal aliens being pumped into so many communities nationwide, and they're getting rained on, as you put it, to a greater extent than those that have been fighting the plight for decades?
Apparently enough that they can afford to try to bribe jurors with $120,000 a pop in order to acquit, feeding our future defendants, because we saw that story as well.
And in that, per the juror, if they voted to acquit, they would get another grocery bag full with $120,000. So for those that don't know, this is a $250 million minimum fraud scheme, which a lot of stuff was confiscated, a lot of property, a lot of exotic vehicles, what have you. When I first read this, because this just happened, I think it was on Sunday too, and this broke, Sunday, Monday, whatever it was, that a grocery bag or cloth bag with $120,000 cash was put on this juror's step. Now, the only people that know the name of the jurors are the lawyers and the defendants. They're not supposed to know the addresses, but somehow they found one. So clearly, when the FBI investigated all this, because this is being federally charged, not state, they clearly did not confiscate all of the ill-gotten means, because they got at least 120 cash laying around, and they're promising another 120.
Yeah.
And now the question is, because they're in jury right now, they're in deliberations. Last I looked, they could be done by now, I don't know. But the question's been, because they actually kicked out another one because they heard about this story. So 2 of them have dismissed, and there's 4 alternates to go. But how do we know if any of the other ones didn't get the same offer? And they didn't report it? You don't know. So you're really are making it look like, And I've heard people say, why would they even call the police? Why would they just keep it? Well, how do you know it's not the FBI doing it?
Yeah.
But apparently they have now raided the home of one of the defendants, or a person. There's 7 of them in this. There's 71, I believe, charged. There's 7 of them in this group because they're doing them in clumps.
Right.
And only one testified on his own behalf in this group. And the one they raided the house of, I can't recall his name. It's down in the South Metro, but they believe he's kind of the ringleader of all this. But obviously, they have a lot of cash laying around.
Yeah. Well, and to your previous point, before I even brought this up, where did that cash come from? You and me, the taxpayer, and everybody else behind us.
Them.
Right. Exactly. And so. When you propose as your solution to these social problems the idea that all we got to do is redistribute the wealth, obviously that doesn't fix the heart problem, because it's the heart problem that is driving people to do it's a heart problem that motivates somebody to take money that was appropriated for the purpose of feeding children and shamelessly misappropriate it to go on vacation, buy houses, buy cars, and set aside a pay off the juror fee bank account somewhere.
But we have to emphasize, this is not like a $5,000 vacation. This is not like a $250,000 or $500,000 house. This was $1 million homes.
Oh, yeah.
Because the bottom number starts at $250 million.
That's correct.
And if you look at all of those that are charged currently, it speaks volumes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely nuts what we find ourselves dealing with here in Minnesota and nationally. And people ask, I'm going up to Leech Lake tomorrow to give a speech to folks, and they want me to talk about the path to victory. And I'm going to bring an optimistic message because that's what I've been asked to come do. And I do believe that there is a path to victory, no doubt. But at the same time, I would be lying if I didn't say that it's a marvel to me that we've gotten to the point where we're at. And because it's a marvel to me that we've gotten to the point where we're at, it's also a marvel to me to contemplate how we're going to get out of it without that change of heart. And the question becomes, what can catalyze the change of heart? Maybe it's the conviction of Donald Trump. Maybe it's the realization that you just had 2 years under a trifecta that you were promised was going to be awesome, and your school got historic funding, but it still sucks because all of the mandates handcuff your administration and your school board from being able to actually make the choices necessary in order to provide your kids with an education, and half your kids still can't read at grading level. Like, maybe there is a point past which, even Democrats, even the mushy middle, it finally snaps and they realize, we got to restore balance. I don't even care what balance looks like. We just got to restore it. We got to have some sort of conversation here about what the best path is going forward, rather than just relying on these knuckleheads to do whatever it is that they want.
So the way I'm actually long on America, I know it's bad. There's a lot of things we could all dwell on the negatives. Humans hate change.
Yep.
And they only change when they absolutely need to. We all know the couple out there, or know of a couple where, he wouldn't quit drinking, and she kept threatening to leave, and then the day, she was packed, had her bags packed, walking out the door, he quit drinking.
Yep.
We've all heard the story. And maybe it's bad enough now.
Yeah.
And it's not a state thing, it's a federal thing, it's a state thing, it's a local thing, because there's a mindset that there's always more. And we can buy our way out of the mess because it's somebody else's money. And now we see that it's all coming to fruition. You can't give trophies to kids who suck at sports and expect them to become better at it. It's simply not going to work.
Right. Yeah.
And now we're telling kids not only that, but because it was really funny, some of the people I met over the years on that part of it, but if they show up for 5 days, they expect a raise because they couldn't believe they pulled it off. But now we're telling them they can be whatever they want to be, whether it's, what do they call them, furries? Or you can pick the opposite gender. You can do all this stuff. And there's not going to be any negative outcome out of this. We see the concerns that have been coming out as of late with, over the last several decades of all the chemicals we put into our kids, and some of them have negative effects. And now we're trying this new experiment. And I believe it would have been 2022 or 2023, your first year. The whole transgender pharmaceutical thing was like $1.8 billion a year, and it's expected to grow 10 to 30% a year. So there's a big financial incentive for some. They don't really care what happens to the little people out there. That's not their problem. And then at the end of the day, we all have to deal with your daughter coming home saying I don't want to do gym because there's a boy in the locker room. And how do you go down and when it's the PC thing to not go against the narrative, but you have little girls who don't feel safe?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, it's what's that trigger point, right? At what point does Dad say, "No, honey, we ain't doing this"? You know.
And I think we're there. I think I'm hearing from enough people Both sides of the aisle, because, we have constituents on both sides of the aisle. I think it's there.
Yeah.
And I think they're getting there, that they may not like their choices, but they know what they have is not working.
Well, here's what we know. I think definitively. You take all this stuff we've been talking about, the conviction of Donald Trump, Mary Moriarty and the Londregan case, the Jamal Mitchell case, the Feeding Our Future scandal, the legislative session, all of it. I think if we're going to glean one object lesson out of the whole thing, then that object lesson is this. Being nice doesn't work. If you're going to fight back against this stuff, you have to fight back against this stuff. That's where we're at. And I think the operative question for the people of Minnesota and the people of the United States is, are you ready to rumble?
I would
if
agree.
You are,
it kind of goes back to,
then we're going to win.
Is it bad enough yet?
Yeah.
And at what point then, if it is bad enough, what are you willing to do about it?
Right.
Quit being nice. Look at all the people during COVID that walked away from very good paying jobs.
Right.
Because they would not take the terms and conditions that suddenly changed.
Yeah.
And there's many of them. Look at the people who have walked away from law enforcement, which, especially in their latter years, or the military. There's several of them that were in their 19th year. They're literally less than a year away from their pension, and they walked.
Right.
Because they would not take the new terms and conditions that was put upon them.
Right.
And I don't disagree with them. So how many of us are out there that are in that mindset versus what's left behind?
Yeah.
And it's clearly not working for them. So I believe we are in a good spot. It's just a matter of getting people to register to vote.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is when I talk about ready to rumble, it's funny because, because of the lopsided biased media coverage and the way that the left gets away with slandering their opponents, you have to qualify these things. But when I talk about not being nice, I'm not saying it's time to go out there and burn things down. I'm not saying that it's time to go out there and punch somebody in the face. I'm not saying that it's time to go out there and be unlawful. What I'm saying is that when you talk about these issues, you can no longer couch it in this defensive language. Things like, well, this is what I believe, and well, I don't mean X, Y, and Z, but you cannot be defensive about it. You have to be assertive. You have to stand on principle. You have to be willing to condemn the other side as the moral monsters that they are, and mean it, and not be apologetic about it. And also in a more, because that's stuff that you and I have to worry about as public figures. But just as the average everyday citizen, you got to be willing for somebody to look at you side-eyed, right? You got to be willing to not be the favorite person in the room, to not be liked by everyone. Let me put it this way. If you're not willing to be openly called out as the worst thing in the world,
The worst name,
bigot, racist, sexist, transphobe, whatever. If you're not willing to face those accusations in public from people who you know and deal with on a day-to-day basis, then you are not ready to take this country back. Because that's what it's going to take.
Well, and so what you're actually calling for is using your First Amendment rights.
And having some balls.
Well, and not kowtowing, right, to all the fear.
Right.
And if it means your whatever social media thing gets suspended or blocked or whatever they call all that,
right,
so be it.
Right. Or you get called into, your HR office or your administrator's office. Listen, it's about time that we started pushing back against them the way they push back against us. I have the right to say what I believe. I have to sit here and look at this guy's rainbow flag in his cubicle all day long. I can't say what I believe, but he's going to shove it in my face?
Exactly.
Are you kidding me? Would you like a class action lawsuit? Because I'll bring it. Because I got people all up in here who feel the same way that I do. They just haven't been willing to say it yet. And once they see me saying it, they're all going to say it. And what are you going to do then, son? That's the attitude that you have to bring to it. And, you got to couch it. You got to couch it. You know your circumstances. I don't. But I'm telling you, man, I'm so sick and tired of people coming up to me and saying, "Oh, thank you for saying what I can't say." Are you mute? Have you just been cured? Did Jesus come down and give you a tongue? Because you're talking to me right now, right? You need to be willing to say the thing
Everybody's
that you
gotta say it.
appreciate me saying. Otherwise, there's no point in me saying it.
You know, as much as the other side of the party or the other side of the aisle likes mob rule, there is a certain part to that if we all start saying it, there's more of us than them, then we win.
That's what I'm saying.
Court of public opinion
Means something.
always wins.
Yes.
And that's where the whole point of even doing this stuff like this.
Yeah.
It's helping people learn the stuff that they don't know.
Right.
Like there's so much stuff packed into these bills, and even liberal people that call me, I had one. She was very upset that I didn't vote for the Equal Rights Amendment.
Yeah.
And so in that, I explained two parts of it, but she focused on the boys in locker rooms and bathrooms, in girls' bathrooms, and that part of it. So she said, okay, so if that's why you didn't vote for it, that makes sense. She didn't want to listen to the other parts of it that I explained to her why I didn't vote for it. She just stuck with that one. But she had no clue either one of those were in there. And the other one was the abortion codified up to the date of birth.
And that's the whole point
But they
of
did
how
not,
they couched it.
But they did not know that was in there.
Right.
And so once you explain it to them, and I've even had family members that were like in House File 1 last year, which was the abortion bill, but very pro-choice family members, and they had no idea how far it went. And then once they learned that, they were very upset.
Well, they probably had no idea what the status quo was before that.
Right. But the point is, if you're only going by the cleverly worded title of the bill,
right,
which is very cleverly worded, always, and then you just go based on what the media is telling you, then it sounds good on its face.
Right.
If that's within your belief system, but then you read it. And then even some of them, like, you literally got to, highlight the spots to help them find it.
Right.
Just because not everybody understands how to read the way this stuff is written. I mean, it's just not a normal read, if you will. They don't know underline is new, stricken is, through the middle. They don't, it's just, they've never read it before. So you have to help them understand, this is the new language. This is what they're taking out. This is what they're adding in. And here's the highlighted part that I think you should look at, because maybe you will agree with me, despite we don't agree on anything. You will also agree that, doing this up to the date of birth might be a bit much. Allowing a 12-year-old girl to go in and get an abortion without any guardian, any adult. No questions asked. And then she can request to be sterilized on top of it. While there's a car sitting out in the parking lot, which is probably a sex trafficker, making sure his product can't have this little mess again. It's his dream come true.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is he's not even going to give that little thing time to heal. He's just going to keep selling it.
Yeah.
And nobody in that room is an adult enough to say, young lady, who drove you here?
Right.
Young lady, where'd you get all that cash in your hand?
Correct.
Young lady, who in the hell got you pregnant?
Correct.
And then walk out in that parking lot and start cracking heads.
Because they're not concerned about that young lady. They're concerned about the sacrifice to Molech. It's about the sacrifice to Molech. That's what it's about. They care about abortion more than they care about anything else. That's why they go after the pregnancy resource centers. That's why they have created this legal funnel that leads to one choice. It's incredibly sophisticated how they've managed to lie by calling it pro-choice, because it's true in this sense. Choice is a singular word, and that's all they're offering is the one choice, not the ability. We're not going to come along you and support you in a myriad of other choices that you could possibly make that affirm life and choose life and uphold life. No, it's the choice to terminate your pregnancy. It's the choice to offer the blood of that child to our idol. That is the only thing that they care about, and that's what the PRO Act was all about. And listen, you don't have to say it like I say it, but by God, say something.
Right. And they always talk about reproductive rights.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. Including the one that's in the womb someday should have that twinkle in their eye.
Right.
When they first meet that young man or woman that, turns that little spark out of, they kind of go, he or she's kind of cute.
Right.
Where's their reproductive right?
That's right. Where's their right to draw breath?
Well, but they're using the word reproductive rights.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take that word and say, where is theirs?
Right. Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, it's getting pretty dark out
Yep.
here. We got ourselves around about an hour. Kids are probably wondering where I'm at. We should probably close it up.
Mosquitoes are starting to come out too, because we live in the fine state of the state bird being the mosquito.
Absolutely. So we'll catch up at some other setting later
Exactly.
down the road.
Sounds good.
The Hudson-Mekeland Podcast, with hosts and Minnesota State Representatives Walter Hudson and Shane Mekeland. Follow, subscribe, like, and share to show your support. On X, find Walter at Walter Hudson and Shane at Shane Mekeland, spelled Mekeland.